Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. While some elements of the establishment media have been downplaying Ron Paul's campaign since his third-place finish in the Iowa caucus, in fact, this was an excellent finish for Ron Paul. And here is why. Even though Ron Paul placed third with about 3,800 votes fewer than Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum, who are in a virtual tie, it is still the case that Ron Paul gets out of the Iowa caucuses the exact same number of delegates that either Romney or Santorum will get. Ultimately, what matters is not the total number of votes that each candidate got, but how many delegates will represent that candidate at the Republican National Convention, which is the venue that will ultimately select the Republican candidate. So, out of the 28 delegates that Iowa will send to the Republican National Convention, Romney, Santorum, and Paul each have exactly 6, which means the 3 of them right now are the front-runners. Of course, it's very early in the primary process. There are 49 other states and a few territories that have yet to select their delegates. The total number of delegates is going to be over 2,100. As a result, anything can still happen. However, what's very clear is Ron Paul is one of the 3 people in the lead. And he has right now the exact same amount of clout as either Romney or Santorum. It makes no sense for the media to downplay him. This morning I saw a despicable graphic on CNN.com showing the pictures of Santorum and Romney, and then a big question mark referring to some third mystery candidate who allegedly has yet to emerge. Well, here's some news for you, CNN. This candidate not only has already emerged, but has been the focus of attention of people who can think for themselves for quite some time now. Several years, in many cases. That person is Ron Paul, and his finish in Iowa shows that he is indeed a viable candidate. Now, if he can take that performance and continue to do as well in New Hampshire and in other early primary states, including my own state, Nevada, then that would be excellent. But it is way too early for any reasonable, impartial observer to rule out Ron Paul. And I think that's a message that needs to be clearly expressed. This time around, CNN has been particularly bad in its coverage of Ron Paul. I think there is good evidence to suggest that CNN has been malicious in its coverage of Ron Paul. Consider the much-touted Gloria Borger interview regarding the Ron Paul newsletters that have created such an unjustified scandal. The interview was cut in such a way as to make it appear that Ron Paul terminated it early out of anger or frustration that he was being asked uncomfortable questions. In fact, if you see the entire uncut portion of the interview, you will find that Ron Paul let the interview go to its natural conclusion. He did not terminate it just because Gloria Borger was asking uncomfortable questions. He continued talking to her for a little bit afterward, and he ended the interview when it was scheduled to end. There was no cutting off due to frustration. So this kind of subtle spin that occurs in the mainstream media, this campaign season, particularly with CNN, is one that rational, thinking individuals ought to really be careful about. It is no longer the case that any thinking person can just trust whatever a reporter tells him. It was never really the case, but now one cannot be forgiven for having that illusion. So if you analyze the Iowa caucuses, and if you analyze the subsequent Republican primary process, keep in mind, fanfare doesn't matter as much as math and organization. The math says that Ron Paul has right now as many delegates as the other two frontrunners. Organization suggests that Ron Paul is going to continue to do very strongly. He has built up, during this election season, a much more organized campaign than he had in 2008. Furthermore, Ron Paul's campaign volunteers and supporters have been instructed not to leave the caucuses after the vote, but to stay in order to be selected as delegates. There's an excellent recent article on this by Grace Weiler of Business Insider showing how Ron Paul, according to the title, may actually have secretly won the Iowa caucuses. And that's because in Iowa, all of the delegates are officially unpledged, even if it's said that they're going to represent one candidate or another. They're not formally committed to that, and technically during the convention they could vote for anybody. But the Ron Paul delegates tend to come from a group of people that is particularly committed to Ron Paul. These are individuals who support Ron Paul's radical alternative to the status quo of American politics. These are the people who are more likely to consistently represent Ron Paul to the end than many of the other candidates' delegates. And there may even be situations where some of the other delegates can be persuaded later on when it comes time for the actual convention to switch sides and support Ron Paul instead. So this is definitely something to watch. Don't believe every headline you see. Don't believe the media fanfare or selective emphasis on one person and attempts to blot out another and replace him with a question mark. Don't believe that. Look at the facts. Look at the figures. Look at the underlying dynamics of each candidate's campaign, which the mainstream media will not necessarily focus on because there aren't as many sound bites to be had in that. There isn't as much appeal to the lowest common denominator to be had in that, but there is truth to be had in that, and there is insight to be had in that about what might happen this election season. Of course, there are no guarantees, but Ron Paul, through his performance thus far, not just in straw polls, but now in the Iowa caucus, has shown to be a viable, electable candidate. And my hope is that that will continue to be the case. My hope is that the media will not be able to derail it. And my hope is that you, reasonable people in my audience right now, will continue to maintain that perception, which may perhaps lead you to support Ron Paul in the polls. Thank you very much.